Welcome everybody to the Hillside Club. So what should a house look like? If you had to condense the Hillside Club's founding ethos down to one single question, it might be, what should a house look like? So the question has been asked and answered countless times through history, but in 1898, a group of energetic and self-assured women set out to answer it once again. So what we call Northside today was laid out in 1889 as Daly's Scenic Park. And here's a picture of Daly's Scenic Park from up on the hill. It can be hard to get your bearings because some of the streets we have now were just dirt tracks then. So here's some street labels. So some of the women who lived here in the Scenic Park could foresee the development that was coming and that would soon fill up this area and more, and they wanted to have a say in what it all looked like. And the problem in their view was the disgrace that had been visited onto San Francisco, a strict, regular street grid laid down heedless of what kind of hills were in the way, and full of white Victorian houses built with similar disregard for the native landscape. This was a desecration of what California had to offer. The California hills are brown, they said, quoting architect Bruce Price, therefore the houses should be brown. That hillside streets be made convenient and beautiful by winding in an easy grade, and as narrow as country roads or lanes, except in the case of important thoroughfares. The trees be planted the length of the streets, suitable to the locality and of uniform variety. That in house building only natural materials be used, such as shingles or shakes, rough stone or clinker brick. That no oil paint be used inside or out, it having been proven that unstained and unpainted wood bears weathering indefinitely and grows more beautiful each season. Okay, so I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. So let's go back and talk about this fellow, Charles Keeler, naturalist, author, poet, public speaker, world traveler. I'm delighted to say we have Charles Keeler's great-granddaughter here with us, Ann Miller. So Keeler embraced the emerging arts and crafts movement, which had, amongst other things, an ethic of living with nature. Today we'd probably call Keeler an environmentalist. And Keeler worked over in San Francisco with the Academy of Sciences, and he took the ferry to work. And in 1891, on the ferry to San Francisco, he met this fellow, Bernard Maybeck. Keeler was 20, and Maybeck was 29, and they found they had lots of common interests, and they became friends. When Keeler married Louise Bunnell in 1893, Maybeck offered to build the newlyweds a house. So Keeler declined the offer at first, but he soon changed his mind, and this is what Maybeck built him, the two of them. It was Maybeck's first residential commission, clad in brown shingles, one of the first in town, unpainted wood throughout. So this was what it looked like inside. Beautiful exposed timberwork, plenty of space for books. But now that Keeler had his house, he was worried. Its effect will be completely ruined when others come and paint stupid white painted boxes all about us. And Maybeck said, well, you must see to it that all the houses about you are in keeping with your own. So Keeler went on a mission. And by 1899, his house was surrounded by houses in keeping with his own. So his house is behind the telephone pole there. But this wasn't enough for Keeler because he didn't want stupid white painted boxes anywhere. So he did what Keeler did best, which was getting people all frothed up about the sorts of things he was all frothed up about. He was an agitator and an evangelist. So the leader of the group of women who formed the Hillside Club in 1898 was Margaret Robinson, Madge to her friends. So Madge was Keeler's neighbor. She lived right around the corner in this house, Veltvreden. She lived there with her mother and stepfather, who was a wealthy banker. His name was Volney Moody. Madge Robinson and Charles Keeler were the sorts of gregarious people who knew everybody that was worth knowing. And so Madge gathered together about 30 of her close and influential friends, all women. And on the 5th of October, 1898, they held the first meeting of the Hillside Club here in this building at Veldvreden. This building still exists, but it unfortunately doesn't look like this anymore because a third story was added in the 50s, and they removed that beautiful Cape Dutch stepped roof there in the upper left. But the house appeared on several postcards like this, colorized postcards, and for a while this house was one of the most famous houses in Berkeley. So Veldvreden is really the only surviving house in this photo here. You can see it right here in the red circle. You can see the outline of the stepped roof. The club published their opinions, their ideals. Madge Robinson wrote articles for magazines like House Beautiful, and the club also arranged for articles to appear in the local newspapers, such as this one from the San Francisco Call in 1901. So we can see Veldvreden featured prominently in the top center, and Charles Keeler's house is in the upper right, and the Hillside School is at bottom center. So let's talk about the Hillside School. This was the first big project. So the new Hillside Club had bigger goals than simply telling people what the streets and the houses ought to look like. They wanted to get things done. And this was the first big project, Hillside School, not to be confused with the current old Hillside School, which is up on Knott Hill and Buena Vista. This is old Hillside School, which was at the corner of Virginia and Leroy, so right here, where the red circle is. One of the club's ideals was that children should spend some of each day outside in the fresh air. And here we see a very posed picture of them tying up bundles of books out on the porch. So the school was built with shingles, and the posts are unpeeled tree trunks. In 1902, the Hillside Club transitioned from an informal ladies' club into a formal, incorporated organization, complete with officers and committees and meeting minutes and men. Charles Keeler was the first secretary and the second president. In 1903, he wrote up all of his club's ideals, at first serialized in a magazine published by Paul Elder, but then gathered into this book called The Simple Home. The original 1904 edition at left is very hard to find and expensive once you do. The 1979 reprint on the right, which has a brilliant introduction by Dmitry Shipinov, formerly here of Berkeley, but who now lives in France. That is also out of print, but it's a lot easier to find and less expensive. So nature was so important to Charles Keeler that in a book about houses, he starts out with a chapter on the garden. He sees the garden as a feature that will lift all boats. So he writes here on this page, a movement for the decoration with geraniums and other plants and vines of the residence district of the poor would, I firmly believe, yield immediate returns in the advancement of culture. Well, I suspect today we'd agree that it takes more than planting a few geraniums to lift the downtrodden out of poverty, but I suppose his heart was in the right place. You can see another photo of Veldvreden there on the right if you turn your head 90 degrees. The club also produced this influential little booklet. They distributed it to anyone who wanted one, especially anyone who wanted to build a house in the hills. But the club was also careful to distribute this booklet to realtors and contractors and improvement clubs all over California. The booklet has no title and credits no author, so different people give it different names. I call it Hillside Architecture. All the drawings in the booklet are by Maybeck. The text is probably also his, or it might be his wife Annie's, or it might be the two of them together. Maybeck sums up the aims of the Hillside Club in just 2 points. Number 1, don't interfere with nature. And number 2, discourage that which may detract from nature. And then in that second paragraph by André, who he means is Louis-Jules André, at whose atelier in Paris Maybec studied while he was at the École des Beaux-Arts. So a few rooms in case of rain. So sometimes this quote is attributed to Charles Keeler, but this little booklet is the source. Hillside architecture is landscape gardening around a few rooms in case of rain. Notice how much emphasis is placed on the outdoors, porches and playgrounds and observation. Maybec also goes on to say, choose wide lots. Do without something else, but don't come 15 miles and climb 600 feet to live on a slice of land against your neighbor's fence. So by 15 miles, what Maybec means here are people coming from San Francisco to live in the East Bay. So this book was from 1906, and after the destruction of San Francisco, a lot of people moved to Berkeley. So the second big project of the new Hillside Club was the clubhouse, which was right here. They were tired of having their meetings at Hillside School, and all three of the founding visionaries were involved. So Madge Robinson and Charles Keeler were board members on the building committee, and Maybec, of course, was chosen to be the architect. Here's what it looked like a month before the grand opening. This is also 1906. And here's the finished building. This is the only known photograph of the exterior of the old clubhouse. Notice it's wintertime because the trees are bare. We don't know the identity of the man standing out in front. I suppose it's possible it's Maybec, who was 44 years old in 1906, but somehow this seems like an older man to me. This was the fireplace at the old clubhouse, which at the old clubhouse was up at this end, where I'm standing. And you've probably seen this picture before because it's hanging on the wall just to the left of the door as you walk into the foyer. This is the first annual dinner in 1910. Now, the photographer is on the stage, which was down at that end in the original clubhouse. And again, the fireplace, which you see in the distance, was up here where I am. There are over 100 people in this photograph, but we only know the names of 14 of them. Well, I should say, we know who they all must be, but we don't know which name goes with which face. So here in red are Bernard and Annie Maybec, and in yellow are the historian Frank Morton Todd and his wife Margaret. And for those of you who collect rare books, here in the blue square is bookseller John Howell and his wife Rebecca. So the program for this dinner also survives. So this is the front of the program. First annual dinner and Halloween jinx. Okay, so this happened on the October 28th that year. Notice that goofy face there up at the top. And someone has hand-stitched blue yarn into this program, which if we look on the other side, is the tail of this black cat. It's Halloween, right? So there's a black cat. So there were 100 people in this dinner. Imagine hand sewing like 100, these little blue threads in 100 of these programs. It also looks like they ate really well that night. I don't know if you can read the menu. Blue Point oysters on the half shell. I'm sorry if I'm bursting any balloons. We eat very nice food here at the 3 club dinners every year, but you're not going to get Blue Point oysters on the half shell. There was also 5 different kinds of live entertainment. And I love this note down at the bottom, which you probably can't read either. The piano was courtesy of the Shawman Mudd Company, which is a play on the name Sherman Clay, if you remember Shawman Mudd, Sherman Clay. Is Halloween jinx, right? You know. So the old clubhouse didn't really have a stage, just a raised platform. It's nothing like this formal stage with a whole backstage and green room like we have today. But that didn't stop them from starting a tradition of theatrical performances, and I'll talk about that more later. So the third big project of the new Hillside Club was the improvements to the Daly's Scenic Park. This was a system of street dividers and retaining walls and sidewalks and stairways. Here you can see a section at Virginia and La Loma, both from 1909 on the left and what it looks like today. The trees have grown up, so you won't be able to see all of this work now if you're standing there. Just like any organization, the Hillside Club changed over time. 5 years after the 1910 dinner, about half these people were no longer members. It happens, right? So people move away, people start families, they develop other interests. The intense political fervor to mold and shape the Northside neighborhood had dissipated, in large part because they had accomplished most of their intended goals. Most of the houses were built in the arts and crafts style. The streets were curved along the contours of the hill. The Hillside School was successful. They got the daily scenic park improvements done. So the club gradually settled down and became primarily a social organization. People came for friendship and community. Well, you all know what happened in September of 1923. As it happens, the fire occurred just 2.5 weeks before the club's 25th anniversary. And so the next day it looked like this. We're on LeConte Street looking north. The Hillside Club was very severely impacted by this. 91 club members lost their homes. So that was 40% of the membership. And the Hillside Clubhouse burned down. So the clubhouse was where that yellow square is on the left. We're looking southeast here. Hillside School also burned down. That's where the red circle is. Charles Keeler's house survived. That's where the green circle is. And Veldvreden, where the first club meeting was held, also survived just barely. The fire was across the street. That's where the yellow circle is. And Hillside Clubhouse was down just out of frame in lower right, where the blue arrow points. But within a year, less than a year, we had a brand new clubhouse, which is the building that surrounds you right now. It was completed in just 4 months, incredibly quickly by today's standards. Right? We wouldn't even have the permits in 4 months. This is the earliest known photograph of the new clubhouse from 1931. Maybeck was not available to be principal architect because he was busy with Principia in the Midwest. So Maybeck's brother-in-law, John White, was the architect. Today's building looks exactly like you see here, except now there's a covered porch, which was built sometime between 1934 and 1947. The fireplace, which, as you recall, was up here, was moved off to one side so that there would be room for the stage. On the 18th of May, 1924, when the building was only partially completed, there was a special ceremony to lay the final hearthstone. For the ceremony, all the hearthstones you see here were in place except for one, and many young girls who were all daughters of the families which had been burned out came forward with flowers, and they laid flowers in the hole where the hearthstone was. They also laid in newspapers, which had stories about the old clubhouse and the fire. And lastly, the keys to the old building. And they all were put in, and then the hearthstone was cemented in place. So under the hearthstone there are the keys to the old clubhouse. My favorite part of this building is that stained glass window. Unfortunately, we don't know who made it. It was a gift from William and Jenny Hale. Jenny Hale was president at the time of the fire, so it was a gift from them. So that the maker was lost to history. The official housewarming for this new building was on the Sunday, the 21st of September, 1924, which included a special ceremony for hanging this lantern, the only thing that survived from the old clubhouse. It's still hanging right there from the balcony in the middle opening. So I'd like to talk now a little about the cadence of the club's annual calendar. With the club's proximity to the university and with so many club members being faculty or administration or staff, it's understandable that the club year would follow the academic year. So the club would wake up in late August. They would welcome the incoming president, the incoming board of directors, just like we did earlier. Maybe have a picnic. There was the Christmas ceremonial in December, something with flowers in the springtime. But come June, the club would go into hibernation for the summer. Since about 1907, the first Monday of every month has been the monthly business meeting. And since 1931, we've called that the fireside meeting. That's the monthly opportunity for club members to get updates on what's going on. But of course, much of that today happens over email. After the meeting, there's always been a program of some sort, usually an invited speaker. This is a tradition that goes back over 120 years. The first known post-business meeting speaker was in October of 1904. So this announcement is from December of 1910. Club member Bernard Maybeck talking about natural woods. And the next month, in January, Charles Keeler talking about the arts and crafts movement. Now, wouldn't you just have loved to have been here to listen to Maybeck talking about natural woods and Keeler talking about the arts and crafts movement? If you could take yourself back. So we still have these fireside meetings and we still invite important people to talk. Last year, for example, we invited Nancy Skinner, and here she's in conversation with former Vice President Arlene Baxter. Speakers have included professors from UC Berkeley, city and state government leaders, chiefs of police, architects, journalists. One day I'll make up a list of everybody who's ever been here for a fireside meeting. Music. So classical music has been part of the Hillside Club since the beginning. This is an early concert from November of 1910 to raise money to buy a Steinway piano, which was purchased, but of course it was destroyed in the fire. So another piano fund was established, leading to the purchase of the Steinway piano that we have now. So these concerts evolved into a regular January event called the Evening of Music. And this was a violin concert. Sometimes the Evening of Music featured the Hillside Chorus. What's unusual about this photo, if any of you have ever sung in a chorus, is that there are just as many men as women. Like this never happens in a chorus, right? We keep this music alive today with several different series of concerts. And so always check the calendars about what's going on. About 1910, there was a series of painting exhibitions that evolved into a regular March event called the Evening of Art. If you know anything about plein air painters, this list of painters I'm going to read off were just amazing. William Keith, Eugen Neuhaus, Giuseppe Cadenasso, Gottardo Piazzoni, Lorenzo Latimer, Xavier Martinez. These were all paragons of art, plein air painting at the time. And these are people whose works live in the big, big museums these days. And we had a show of them right here at the Hillside Club, and in 1912 and in 1913. In 1914, the show featured only women painters. Dancing. So dancing was a consistently popular pastime at the club. Every year there was a series of assembly dances, which is to say ballroom dancing, always with live music. During the Hillside Club's lean years in the 1980s and 90s, it was primarily ballroom dancing and rental income from outside dance events that kept this place afloat. As most of the traditional downtown ballrooms in Oakland, Berkeley either closed or carpeted over their dance floors, a venue here like the Hillside Club with both a nice stage and a nice dance floor became a really valuable event location. So let's talk about theater. If you have read this excellent book, Berkeley Bohemia, you know that many Berkeley residents were enthusiastic participants in what was called the Little Theater Movement, which began in 1912. And the Hillside Club was a hotbed of theatrical performances, even though the old clubhouse didn't really have a stage. So while there was a Christmas play in 1908, the club's tradition of a Christmas ceremonial really started when Bernard Maybeck got a hold of it. We don't know precisely the date of this photograph, but it's possible that this was the first ceremonial in 1910. This is the earliest known photograph of a club theatrical production. There was a ceremonial every year here for almost 100 years, from 1910 until 2003. It really is difficult to overstate the importance of theater in the history of the Hillside Club. This was a really big deal every year. Lots of club members were involved. And this is the second earliest known photograph of a Hillside Club production from 1914. The woman at right is 19-year-old Dorothy Wetmore, who went on to become a professional actress. This was the scenery from the 1926 spring extravaganza called Bloomgarten. This is the first photograph of production here in the new clubhouse. The scenery was probably painted by Maybeck, who continued to paint scenery for club productions for years after this. We still have some of Maybeck's backdrops downstairs. This fuzzy 1933 photograph is noteworthy for showing Maybeck on stage. He's the one at the far left. And for a long time, these few photographs that I've just showed you constituted a large part of what we knew about the club's long tradition of theater. But that all changed when Carol Tomlinson contacted us early last year. Carol donated her family's archive of theatrical material, scripts and lyrics and sheet music and photographs and newspaper clippings, about 5 or 6 linear feet of stuff. Carol's parents were longtime Hillside Club members, and they were both hip deep in all the theater productions. Carol's mother, Lois, was a composer and lyricist, and she was the piano accompanist for at least 16 of the shows over 20-some years. And her father, Tommy, acted and sang. Carol herself was an actress and talented mezzo-soprano and was on this stage a whole lot in the 1960s and 70s, often as a leading lady. Did Carol make it today? She was good. Oh, there she is. Okay. Yeah. Thank you for coming, Carol. I'm glad you're here. So I'm going to show you some photographs from 2 different productions from the 1960s. Nobody has seen these photographs before. Where There's a Will, the will being William Shakespeare. So the story revolves around an ordinary modern woman taking a nap. That is Carol right here, asleep on the couch. But when she wakes up, she finds herself in Elizabethan England. And still dressed in her modern 1960s skirt and blouse, the townspeople take her along, where she gets to meet William Shakespeare himself. And eventually, Carol is given proper Elizabethan clothing to wear. I should say that these shows were all musicals, and lots of songs, almost all of it composed and performed by members of the club. This was really a homegrown operation. And I just want you to look at all of these fancy Elizabethan costumes made for this show, a show that was only performed twice, as was the club's habit. One performance was for club members, and the second performance was for the general public. How many hours of work do you think went into these costumes? So perhaps this is a good time as any to emphasize one important thing about the Hillside Club, is that the Hillside Club was a club. You were either a member or you were not. Some events, such as the annual dinners, were strictly for members only. Other events, such as the fireside meetings, were for members and guests. Guests, not the public. And those guests couldn't just walk in. Members had to buy a guest pass for members for that event. About the only time the general public got to see this room was either by renting the hall privately or by coming to see the spring extravaganza on the public performance day. So we still have people come into this building and they say, "Oh, I've driven past this building for years, but I've never known what it was like." Well, in the old days, the reason you felt that way is because you were never allowed inside, because it was a club. So this was the show the next year. Lucky Lulu had a Western theme. So for 85 years, well, actually, maybe a little more. From about 1914 to 2003, there was a spring extravaganza here at the Hillside Club. Now, occasionally, the club would present that something had been written for Broadway, but for the most part, they were written and performed completely within Hillside Club. So here's another show I want to talk to you about from 1965 called Medicine Show. It tells the story of Professor Bunkum. And Bunkum traveled around the Midwest with his black bag full of lotions and potions, which may or may not have been effective. Think Donizetti's The Elixir of Love, or Meredith Willson's The Music Man. So my mother used to tell me stories about my great-grandma Rose, who could rattle off Professor Bunkum sales pitches that she had heard at county fairs in Illinois in the late 1800s. And I'm sure that there were a number of Hillside Club members whose parents could rattle off similar sales pitches. And this is the backside of the program. And what I want to call out is how many people are listed. There are 54 different names on this program, and that's over 1/4 of the entire club's membership in 1965. And while there were only 2 performances, there was an incredible amount of work, right? To go in just before that, of course, there were typically 12 rehearsals. 12 rehearsals, and if you were in the show, you had to come to the rehearsals. And then there was making all the costumes and composing all the music and building all the sets and designing the lighting and the publicity and the selling all the tickets. This was a big deal. And part of the publicity job was getting the extravaganza into the local newspapers. So here's a clipping from the Oakland Tribune in 1965. 2 things strike me about this clipping. First, it was in the women's section. Back when newspapers had women's sections, I'm glad we've moved on from that. And second, it claims that 400 people came to see the show, right? 200 people in this room. It was a really packed house. And guess what? The cast of those 400 left those 400 people gulping for more. So a happy cure-all indeed. Here we have some of the men waiting to get their stage makeup. You can see 2 youngsters, Donald and Kathleen Pierce, who've been recruited for the show by their parents. Okay, so here's the really, really cool thing. So Carol Tomlinson, as part of her family archive that she donated to the club, the archive also included about a dozen 6-inch reel-to-reel tapes. And they were recordings of the extravaganzas from the 60s and 70s, sitting in Carol's closet for 50 years. So we've begun to digitize these tapes, and I'm going to play you a clip from the Medicine Show. I'm going to play you a song called I'd Like to See the World with You, which includes both of Carol's parents, her mother Lois, who was the composer and lyricist for this song, and you'll hear her playing piano, and her father Tommy, who you'll hear singing along with Ruth Johnson. So this was recorded on the 15th of March, 1965. You were the first people in 60 years to hear this.
Hey, there, we might have a double wedding here between you. Well, now, if you're going to be on the show, you think you could do a duet of some kind? Try it, see here.
I'd given up that you would ever marry me. I thought you'd always live your life alone. Now I can see that life for us will ever be full of romance, a love that's all our own.
Isn't that great? Carol, thank you so much for the donation of these, and I'm really looking forward to hearing the rest of the tapes once we get them digitized. So that was the Medicine Show from March of 1965. But just a couple of months before that, over on the other side of town, a student named Jack Weinberg was working a table on Sproul Plaza trying to raise money for civil rights work. He refused to show his ID to police officers and was arrested. A squad car was surrounded by a group of students, a crowd of students, and another fellow named Mario Savio got up on top of the police car after taking off his shoes so it wouldn't damage the roof of the car, and gave an impassioned speech about the fundamental right of free speech. So the squad car was stuck there for 32 hours. And most people mark this as the beginning of the free speech movement. Eventually, the police decided not to press charges and everybody went home. But of course, the trouble didn't end there. A couple months later, several thousand students staged a sit-in inside Sproul Hall to protest the restrictions of free speech. Joan Baez came to sing. And at 2 a.m. the next morning, about 800 students were arrested and taken to Santa Rita Jail in Dublin, where they were released. By January, the university had mostly backed down, allowed information tables on Sproul Plaza. But you all know this town. There are always things to protest about, particularly the Vietnam War. And this sort of came to a head 5 years later with People's Park. 15th of May, 1969, this was the day that James Rector was shot and killed, and the day that Alan Blanchard was shot and blinded. And I think it's safe to say that this crowd people we're seeing here at the corner of Haste and Telegraph did not include any of these middle-aged and elderly white men dressed in the Hillside Club's traditional ceremonial robes, carrying a papier-mâché boar's head and singing the boar's head carol at the Christmas ceremonial. Berkeley was changing really fast, but the Hillside Club was not. Here, things were still very white and actually very conservative. And the median age, as you can see here in this picture, was pretty high. For that matter, Northside was also changing since so many students lived up here. When the club was first formed in 1898, it was a neighborhood club, right? You had to live in the neighborhood. The club's bylaws required that you lived in the neighborhood. But as the club aged, the residency restrictions were relaxed. Soon it was okay to be a member if you lived anywhere in Berkeley. But once the Caldecott Tunnel opened up in 1937, a lot of people wanted to retire out to places like Walnut Creek, but keep their Hillside Club ties. So the club changed its rules again to allow anyone who lived in Berkeley or the surrounding communities to be a member, and that language still exists today. But the club was certainly very aware of all those events over on Southside, and it's easy to read into the euphemisms that were used in the monthly newsletters. In 1966, the club invited the chief of police to talk about the current unrest. And in 1969, just 5 weeks before the People's Park protest, they invited the city manager to address the serious problems that the city of Berkeley has to solve. Well, at this point in the lecture, I know what you are thinking. No, honestly, I really know what you're thinking. You are thinking that this is the most comfortable, the most luxurious chair that I have ever sat in. But I will say that in 119 years of this clubhouse, we've had a clubhouse here, these are only the third chairs. So here are the original chairs from 1906. They look a little low to me, but then I have very long legs. But they look definitely more comfortable than the replacement chairs, because all of the 1906 chairs were lost in the fire, of course. So these were the replacement chairs. They look really low to me, and they lean back really far. This was an annual dinner, and it was kind of awkward to lean back like that and have dinner. But they're also beefier and heavier. That may have been on purpose. Maybe the 1906 chairs broke easily. Anyway, by 1972, the club was really tired of these old chairs, and so they bought, ta-da, the new chairs, the ones you're sitting in right now. So they were very proud of these chairs in 1972. So this is the chair committee. On the left, that's Tommy Tomlinson, Carol's father, whom you just heard singing. So these nice new chairs are 53 years old now. And the moral of the story, be very careful when you pick your chairs, because you're going to be sitting in them for 50 years. You're not going to just change them all out 10 years later because, well, you decided they didn't work out after all because you sunk too much money into them. Anyway, so we are thinking very carefully about new chairs, we promise, and we should have new chairs to a Hillside Club, sometime soon. But aside from everything so far, what has the Hillside Club done lately? Well, if you ask me, the most important thing is we're still here, which 30 years ago was not a certain thing at all. By the late 1990s, the club membership had fallen all the way down to 60, and the median age was very high. The spring extravaganza had died out because there simply weren't enough people left to do it. The Christmas ceremonial was on its last legs. A group of members wanted to dissolve the Hillside Club and sell the building. And the late Herb Hadley, who was president at the time, later told me, I couldn't let that happen on my watch. And so thanks to the hard work of a few key people, such as Herb, things turned around. It actually turned around in just a few years. The main thing that helped, of course, was lots of new members, younger, energetic. And the other thing was a change in the model of what the Hillside Club is. We no longer aim to be the exclusive gated community that the club was in the past. And we've acknowledged that times have changed. Most people don't have the time to devote to a months-long project like the Spring Extravaganza. Okay, you say, but what has the club done lately? Well, we've got lots of reasons to come here, such as the concert series and the Hillside Echo series and the documentary films and the Last Friday luncheons, as well as third-party events that are open to the public, like the Etude Club or the Hoot concerts or square dancing or events like this. Okay, but what else have we done besides all that? Well, we're maintaining the building. The garden was something that was important to the club from the very beginning. So in 1911, there was a call for donations for plants for the garden, including, I'm very happy to say, lots of California native plants. And thanks primarily to the late Jana Olson, our front garden now is planted almost exclusively with California natives. And every spring, we're one of the stops on the Bringing Back the Natives garden tour. This year, the tour is on May 5th, 2 weeks from this coming Saturday. You should consider it. So take a look around the room right now, and you'll notice that the dominant color is brown. Now, this makes sense, maybe, if you remember the tenets of the early Hillside Club is that the hills are brown, so the houses should be brown. And you might think that this room has always been brown like this. Well, several months ago, the club hired a specialist to come and look at the plaster lozenges and trefoils that line the proscenium and line these buttresses. We had always suspected that they were originally a different color, and the specialist indeed confirmed that. This is what it looks like today, but this is what we think it originally looked like. And you can see over on the right there, the red and gold, as a sample of what we are hoping it will look like again in the future. All the stuff that covered up that red and blue and gold was a combination of intentional paint and unintentional cigarette and cigar smoke and 100 years of grime. Now, you might think that all these colors are too bright, too gaudy, and have nothing to do with the arts and crafts movement, but we do not think so. Now, this building is not Bernard Maybeck, it's John White, but it's certainly cut out of Maybeckian cloth. And you only have to look at the interior of the First Church of Christ Scientist over on Southside to remember that Maybeck was happy to use bright colors and accents. So this is what the proscenium looks like now, as you can see. And this is what we think it might look like in the future. So I'm going to flip back and forth between the two a couple times so you can see it. So currently, maybe in the future. Okay, the garden and paint rejuvenation stuff, that's lots of fun. But there are many heavier duty items on the capital improvement checklist. We've replaced the roof. You can see the old roof in the upper left. We had chronic problems with this roof, lots of leaks into this main room. So we're very happy with the new roof. It doesn't leak anymore. As you know, as is officially required by the arts and crafts movement, this building is clad in brown shingles. Some of those shingles may date back as early as 1946, and they need replacing, particularly on the south and west walls. So the club heard about a fallen redwood log up near Arcata. Not this particular log. This is an AI-generated log. But we acquired a log, and we had it split into a whole bunch of barn shakes, which we are going to use to reshingle the south wall. That will happen soon. As I've talked about, the clubhouse is a community-based venue for a wide range of performing arts, including opera and theater and music and dance and lectures and films and more. And all of this requires adequate stage lighting. Some of it, especially theater and opera, requires complex stage lighting. The current lighting system dates from the Lyndon Johnson administration, with lamps that get very hot and use a lot of electricity. The goal is to swap in LEDs, not just on stage, but throughout the room. Phase 1 of this project should begin later this month. And once finished, the new system should attract theater groups that currently don't perform here because we can't provide them with the kind of lighting they need. Underneath the stage, you've probably never been down there, but there's a basement area used by performing groups for changing, for applying makeup, and all those backstage things that performing people need to do. But the basement got pretty shabby in recent decades. This has all been spruced up. New floors, new paint, new resurfaced stairs, new shelves and counters, lighting. Yeah, it's much nicer down there now. Now, I promise you the purpose of this talk was not fundraising, but we do have a capital campaign going. And so far, that campaign has raised over $238,000. But as you can see, that doesn't cover everything we need to do. We want this building to last another 100 years. And if you are so inclined, do consider a donation to the Berkeley Historic Building Fund. There's the link for the building fund. But more important than having your money is having you. We would love to have you. Won't you please consider joining the Hillside Club? Dues are only $160 per year. You will not find a better deal than that in this town. Well, I've taken you from 1898 to 2025. This coming October will be the club's 127th birthday. Thank you very much again to the Historical Society and Museum for the kind invitation to speak today. It has been my pleasure. Thank you very much.